For as long as I can remember, I've always worked harder than those around me. Not for praise, but because I believe in hard work and teamwork. In my first job, I stayed late, took on extra tasks, and helped others. Initially, it felt like we were all working toward the same goal, but over time I noticed while I was putting in extra hours, others were leaving early or shifting their work onto me. I ended up doing the work of several people. Management didn't seem to care, and my coworkers became experts at dodging responsibility. The camaraderie faded and frustration grew. Now, as a manager, I see the same behavior. If I even glance at someone's file, they assume I'll take over. I've tried addressing the slackers, but higher-ups won't allow it. When I attempted to fire one underperforming employee, the union stepped in, and management dismissed the issue due to her connections. I warned them we'd regret it, but nothing changed. 5 years ago, before my promotion, I almost stopped helping others. My coworkers convinced management I had an easier workload because I stayed on top of things. A new manager reassigned tasks, despite me handling 43% of the workload. Coworkers resented me, calling me a bootlicker. I had few friends at work, partly because I was also in the Army Reserve. Last year, I spent 100 days on military assignments, which didn't sit well with my employer. But I didn't mind. I enjoyed the military work and took every opportunity. My home life suffered too. My wife and I were both unhappy in our jobs. We earned good salaries, over $60,000 for me and mid-$50,000 for her, but rarely had time to enjoy it. We could afford nice things, but we didn't buy them because we were too busy to use them. Vacations were rare unless work-related. Even though everything was paid off and we were saving money, Beulah and I spent less and less time together. When we were younger, especially in college, we were deeply in love and inseparable. But after our son Charles was born, it became harder to find time for closeness. Our careers and my reserve duties consumed most of our time, leaving little room to reconnect. I became the primary caregiver for Charles, and many days I left for work before Beulah was even awake. By evening, we were too busy or tired to spend time together. On Monday, August 21st, Charles, now 20, was heading back to college. He asked for a family breakfast before he left, and he seemed sad. I could tell he sensed the tension in our family. When I asked him what was wrong, he said he felt like something wasn't right anymore. Beulah barely acknowledged him, engrossed in her book. After breakfast, I walked with Charles to his truck. He hugged me tightly and said, "Dad, I understand. You need to get a life and be happy again." His words hit hard. I watched him drive away, feeling emptier than ever, heading to a job I despised. Beulah slept late all weekend and went out with friends Saturday night. While Charlie and I spent time together before he returned to school, Beulah mostly read. She didn't help with his barbecue send-off and was late to the table, absorbed in her book. At work, one of my claims reps, also the union steward, brought in an unruly client she couldn't handle. I wasn't surprised since I had already been listening to the interview. I took over, dealing with a rude, demanding client trying to file a fraudulent claim. After an hour, I got him out of the office. I was the last one there besides the manager, John, who invited me for a beer. We had a drink, but I felt guilty for spending even a little time at the bar. When I got home, the kitchen was dark. Beulah hadn't made dinner. I found her in the den, reading with a plate of snacks beside her. She didn't even greet me. "No dinner?" I asked, irritated. She shrugged, said she had a sandwich, and told me to fix something for myself. Angry but not wanting to argue, I made a sandwich and grabbed another beer. As I ate, I reflected on my life and how overwhelmed I felt. I knew something had to change, but I wasn't sure what or how to make it happen. Beulah barely spent any time with me anymore, and I was tired of her going out and ignoring me when she was home. We used to argue about it, but I eventually gave up. I considered divorce, but didn't want to disrupt Charlie's life while he was still living with us. Looking back, our relationship had been falling apart for years. After dinner, I cleaned up and went to my office to work. I had learned not to bother Beulah when she was reading. She either ignored me or walked away. Feeling frustrated, I poured myself a glass of scotch and sat in my chair trying to calm down. What am I doing? I thought. I'm married, but I feel completely alone. I work over 40 hours a week at my civilian job and put in another 60 hours a month for the reserves. I'm exhausted. I have to maintain the house, the vacation cabin, and stay fit for the Army. Everything's paid off, but we don't even get to enjoy it. I laughed bitterly. We've got $1 million in savings and nearly the same in retirement accounts. We could retire and live off the interest, but Beulah won't agree. I laughed again. Even if she didn't work, she probably wouldn't spend time with me. Sometimes I wonder if she's having an affair. I had looked into it before and found nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling. She ignores me, never kisses me, and when she agrees to have sex, it's like she's doing me a favor. Later, I heard her get into bed. I decided to try initiating something. It's been 3 weeks, I thought as I climbed into bed. I touched her, but she slapped my hand away. No, she muttered. I tried again, and she repeated, no, curled into a ball, and went to sleep. Frustrated, I got up and went back to my office, turning to an adult site. It feels like she's not even here, I thought bitterly. I don't even want to be with her anymore. The next morning, my alarm went off at 5 a.m., and Beulah snapped, "Turn that thing off. Why don't you sleep in the spare room if you have to get up so early?" I wanted to sleep in, but I had to get to reserves. Later that night, after another long day, a friend stopped by my office. "Ron, you still up for supper? You look like you need cheering up," he said. I had planned to go straight home, but I sighed and agreed. We had drinks and supper, and as we ate, he asked, "What's going on with you?" I don't know why, but I opened up about everything. My job, my marriage, my future. By the end, I found myself saying, honestly, the only bright spot in my life right now is the reserves. Jeff leaned back and said, "Ronnie, I don't know your wife, but what you've described doesn't sound normal. It sounds like she's avoiding you and doesn't care anymore." I sighed. "I've wondered if she's cheating, but I don't think so. I even followed her once and found nothing." Jeff raised an eyebrow. "What did you find?" "Nothing. It just feels like something's missing. Maybe I pushed her away. She's always with friends." Jeff leaned in. "Why not find out for sure? You don't have to do it yourself." "What do you mean?" "My cousin and brother-in-law do private investigations. They could help." I rubbed my face, feeling the weight of the suggestion. "I don't know, Jeff. I hate spending money on that." Jeff smiled. "Ronnie, you deserve to know. Let me call them. What's the worst that could happen?" I stared at my empty glass and finally sighed. "Go for it." Jeff looked surprised. "Yeah? Yeah, have them call me. If we agree on a price, I'll hire them. I need to know. If she's cheating, I'm done. If not, she's still going to have to change." Jeff gave me his work number and said, "I think you're doing the right thing." I woke up the next morning hungover in Jeff's hotel room. Sunday's reserve meeting dragged on, and all I could think about was getting home. When I did, Beulah didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't seem to care. I tried talking to her, but she made it clear I was bothering her. So I gave up, cleaned up, and went to bed. By Monday, Jeff's brother-in-law called, and I agreed to start the surveillance. They stayed at my cabin using GPS trackers, bugs, and even recorded conversations from Beulah's phone and car. After the first week, there was nothing. Beulah spent her evenings with work friends, visiting bars, chatting about celebrities, and sometimes going to the library. One Saturday, they followed her to a small party. Just her friends, no men. This routine continued for 6 weeks. She wasn't cheating. Even though I was convinced she wasn't having an affair, the distance between us remained. I tried everything, bringing flowers, cooking her favorite meals, calling her at work, and asking her on dates. But all my efforts were met with anger or indifference. She wouldn't let me kiss her, and nothing seemed to work. On the 7th week of the investigation, the private investigators called me at work. "Ronnie," one said, "you might want to head home early. We overheard Beulah talking to someone in HR, saying, 'Let's do it tonight while Ronnie's still at work.'" My heart sank. After a meeting, I rushed home, arriving 30 minutes early. A strange Lexus was in the driveway. I quietly entered through the kitchen, hoping to catch her in the act. In the den, Beulah sat with a glass of wine, and a man was sitting in my chair drinking my scotch. There was a laptop, printer, and her company's logo on the table. "You're home early," Beulah said. "Good. I thought that phone call might bring you home early. This is one of our attorneys, and we can finalize things now." The man handed me an envelope. "You've been served. These are divorce papers. Mrs. Stevens is being fair, but you can have your attorney review them." Stunned, I asked, "Why? Why don't you want to fix this?" She replied, "Ronnie, we've grown apart. We don't fit anymore. You've changed. You got caught up in the reserves and never grew with me. I've noticed you've been trying lately, but you're boring now. All you talk about is work, investments, or the news. I spend more time with my friends because they're interesting. You always take management's side and don't care about my feelings." She added, "I thought you were having an affair. And when I found out you were investigating me, I let it happen. I hoped you'd learn something, but you didn't. You just tried the same tricks to get me to have sex." Beulah sighed. "It's time to end this. I want to enjoy my life without worrying about you. I've offered a fair settlement. You get the cabin and land. I keep the house. If you don't agree, I'll ask." I thanked him and went back to my office. Coincidentally, the second item in my inbox was a listing of available tours. I read through it carefully. A few stood out. One in Hawaii for 6 months and one in Great Britain for a year, plus a couple in the US for a year. By the end of the day, I decided to go for it and requested orders for either Hawaii or Great Britain. I signed the paperwork that Sunday before returning to my dull routine. The only highlight during that time was the completion of my new garage in Breezeway. I'd come home, check the construction progress, then do paperwork, work on my computer, or just exist. I turned the dining area of my cabin into an office with a desk, file cabinets, and a TV I could use as a computer monitor. I'd spend my time trading stocks, researching, or surfing the net. I slowly started getting to know my neighbors. On weekends, I'd visit local cafes or grab breakfast on my way to work. Some of the locals, like Jim Fielding, a retired Army officer, tried to convince me to go to the senior center dances. Jim joked, "The women don't care how old you are. They might even prefer you if you can still get it up. After my divorce, they nearly fought over me at the dances." The men laughed and encouraged me to join in. In the evenings, I enjoyed the peaceful view from my yard, overlooking the river. A small inlet with a gravel bar ran beside my yard, where a spring trickled into the water. There was a deep swimming hole nearby, perfect for fishing. I looked forward to summer and watching the canoeists pass by, hoping some would stop for a swim. The serenity of the setting helped me relax more than I ever did at my house in town. As spring approached, I started planning a landscaping project for my yard. Around that time, I also couldn't stop thinking about the women at the senior center dances. It had been almost 7 months since I'd had Zex, and I was feeling the lack. Knocking off wasn't cutting it anymore, so I finally let the guys talk me into going to the Christmas meal and dance at the senior center. At the dance, one of the regulars introduced me to people. Just as the guys had warned, I was quickly surrounded by women, some my age or a little older, eager to meet me. I danced more than I sat, with many of the women being quite forward, even rubbing or touching me. Around 10 p.m., I stepped outside, and one of the more aggressive women followed me. She wrapped her arms around me and kissed me. She didn't hold back, saying, "I heard you haven't been late in months, so let's do it now." I didn't stop her, and we ended up having Zex. Afterwards, she kissed me and said, "That was good, Ron. I'm here at every dance, so if you want to do this again, I'm in the book." I returned to the dance with shaky knees. My friend Teddy laughed and teased me, saying, "Looks like Rose got another one. You okay, stud?" A little embarrassed, I sat down, but soon saw Rose leaving with another man. Teddy warned me. She usually has a couple of guys at these dances and sometimes goes home with a different one. Be careful with her. Always use protection. She's been married and divorced 5 times, but she sure knows what she's doing in bed. Later, a widow named Addie asked me to dance. She danced close, laying her head on my shoulder. She told me, "If you want something with me, steer clear of Rose. She's known to give men gifts from time to time, so you might want to get checked out." I hadn't even thought about disease when I slept with Rose. Feeling sick, I left the dance and went home. That Monday, I made a doctor's appointment to get tested. I was a wreck until the results came back clean at the end of the week. I swore I'd never have Zex again without protection. I stocked up and made sure I had rubbers in my truck, wallet, and at home. I also planned to get tested for HIV a couple of times over the next year, just to be safe. On December 21st, I came home and found active duty orders for Hawaii, starting January 6th for 6 months. The next day, I gave my boss a copy and requested military leave. He and his boss weren't happy and asked me to try to cancel the orders, but I refused. From that point, they were cold toward me. Christmas was rough. My son, Charlie, spent 5 days with me, then left to spend New Year's with his mom. He apologized, but I understood. His friends and the excitement were in town. I was just grateful for the time he spent with me. The week before my deployment, I took vacation to prepare. I arranged for Jeff and his wife to watch the cabin and set up my mail to be forwarded to Hawaii. Hawaii was beautiful, and I enjoyed both the work and the scenery, especially the women. I decided to have some fun while I was there. I wasn't emotionally invested in anyone, but if we didn't sleep together, we didn't go out again. That became my rule. It was well known among the women who frequented the same places, and many played along, looking for a good time in exchange for meals, drinks, and sometimes resort weekends. I preferred tourists because they were there for fun and wouldn't want to settle down. By the end of my tour, I was tan, in great shape, and satisfied. I returned home in early July and went to my office to arrange my return to work. However, my entrance codes didn't work, so I had to wait for the office to open. When I finally got in, some coworkers greeted me, but most just stared. I asked to speak with my old boss, but was told he no longer worked there. I was directed to the new assistant manager, Belinda Scroggins. Belinda sat behind my old desk and, in a condescending tone, asked what she could do for me. I explained I was there to arrange my return and handed over my release orders and paperwork. Without even looking at them, she sneered, "There's no position for you here. You resigned, and both the manager and assistant manager roles are filled. We have no need for more help." I was left stunned by her response. I sat in shock for a moment, feeling my temper rise. Not just over the job, but because of Belinda's rude and illegal response. I leaned back and said, "First, I didn't resign. I was placed on military leave. Second, I don't need to be rehired because I wasn't terminated unless it was a mistake. And third, what you're doing is illegal. Under USERRA, I'm entitled to re-employment with the same seniority and position, or a higher one if I would have been promoted. Since my old manager is gone, I expect to be placed in either my former role as assistant manager or possibly the manager's position." Belinda glared at me, her face red with anger. "You've got more nerve than any man I've met. This interview is over. Leave before I call security." I replied, "Fine, but I want to see the paperwork showing I resigned and get a written rejection of my reinstatement request." Belinda immediately called security, asking for someone to escort me out. The security guard, Terry, arrived, looking embarrassed, and asked me to leave. I stood up, saying, "Belinda, you're making a serious mistake. You should contact personnel before this gets worse." That evening, I tried to call my old boss, but found his number was disconnected. I wrote a letter to the personnel office, requesting reinstatement and attaching the same documents I had tried to leave earlier. I sent it via certified mail, including copies of my military leave paperwork. Over the next few days, I called my old office, but they ignored me. 2 weeks later, I received a letter saying they had no position for me, claiming I had voluntarily resigned and would need to reapply for a job. I immediately hired a lawyer and filed for unemployment benefits. I spent the summer enjoying myself, working in the garden, fishing, swimming, and relaxing by the river. I continued my reserve duties and took a few short training tours. I began to recognize some of the people who passed by in canoes on the river, especially one friendly group of 2 men and 2 women. They'd wave and shout greetings as they floated by. Recently, I noticed one of the canoes now had 2 women in it, while the other still had a man and a woman. One day, while I was fishing, I saw the 2 canoes coming toward me, paddling quickly as if in a hurry. They turned toward my gravel bar and beached the canoes, the 2 women from the first canoe getting out fast. The man and woman from the second canoe followed, securing both boats. They all walked right past my no trespassing sign. I was about to say something when one of the women, who had always been in the 2 women canoe, limped over to me with a tentative smile. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, wincing. "I know you have a sign, but this is kind of an emergency. Could you help me?" I looked down and saw a bloody rag hanging out of her shoe, which had a gash on the side. She limped worse now. I stood up quickly as she sat on the bench at my picnic table, grimacing in pain. Her foot was bleeding pretty badly. "Someone broke a glass bottle on the rocks," she explained, frustrated. "I stepped on it and it went through my shoe into my foot. We can't get the bleeding to stop." I quickly picked her up and carried her to my house. "Someone open the door," I called over my shoulder. "I'll take her to the bathroom to help." I set her on the edge of the tub, ran warm water, and carefully cleaned the wound. After disinfecting it, I asked one of the other women to get my first aid kit from under the sink. I used a pressure bandage and instructed them to apply pressure above the wound. "You'll need stitches," I told the group. "It's not too serious, but it needs to be closed. I can drive her to the hospital if you'd like." The injured woman, who I now noticed was in great shape and quite beautiful, looked at her foot, which was still bleeding a bit. "I think he's right," she said. "I need to go, and he seems trustworthy." Her friend asked, "Can we leave the canoe here?" I nodded, and she ran to secure it. I pulled my truck up, and when she returned, I tossed a chain to the man and told him to lock the canoe to a tree. We headed to the hospital, and during the drive, the woman introduced herself. "I'm Laura Childs. I live with my parents about 4 miles downstream. I used to have a boyfriend, but we broke up when I found out he wasn't actually divorced." Her friend muttered something as she said that. I learned that her family knew some of my friends, including Jeff and Charlie. We shared some stories on the way to the hospital. Once there, we checked in, and the usual waiting began. Laura's brother and an older woman who looked like their mother arrived about 45 minutes later. Her brother, Aaron, rushed up to me. "How's Laura? Where is she?" he asked, pale with worry. "They're in an exam room," I replied. "Ask the clerk, and they'll tell you where." Aaron hurried off to check on Laura, while her mother, Constance, who introduced herself as Connie, stood by my chair and smiled. She extended her hand and said, "Thank you for helping my daughter. I apologize for my son's behavior. He's very protective of Laura and doesn't know how to handle it when she gets hurt." I nodded and replied, "I understand. We're practically neighbors, so I'm sure I'll see you around." Connie smiled again and excused herself to check on Laura, saying they had enough room to get everyone home. After that, I decided to stay in town for dinner. While waiting at my favorite restaurant, I spotted my ex-wife, Beulah, sitting with her friends and two effeminate men. One of the women was Belinda Skagans. They were laughing and chatting, and I overheard them discussing the latest scandal involving one of Beulah's favorite actresses. I walked by unnoticed, listened for a bit, but quickly lost interest and returned to my table, thinking, it takes all kinds. At least I knew I hadn't been replaced. After dinner, I went home, showered, and grabbed a bottle of Glenmorangie. I sat on my patio, watching the stars, feeling content. There was no one to bother me, and I could do whatever I wanted. As I relaxed, I thought about building a privacy fence so I could sunbathe undressed in the summer without worrying about the river traffic. I missed female companionship, but there was no one around who interested me. The women in town were either Beulah's friends or former co-workers. I felt alone, but knew I was better off than when I was with Beulah. Jeff kept encouraging me to attend the senior center dances or join the group at the cafe, but I preferred my solitude, especially in the mornings by the river, enjoying the peace and watching the sunrise. One early morning, as I was fishing by the river, I heard a hum that grew louder. Annoyed, I looked up to see a flat-bottomed John boat speeding toward me from around the bend, knowing it would disturb my peaceful morning and ruin the fishing for a while. As the boat approached, I saw it was Aaron, Cindy, and an older man. Aaron waved as they pulled into my cove and beached the boat. Ignoring the no trespassing sign, they headed straight toward me. With a sigh, I reeled in my line and walked over to them. Aaron smiled and shook my hand. "Mr. Stevens, thanks again for helping us last week," he said. "This is my father, Roger. We're here to get the other canoe and then we'll be out of your way." Roger also shook my hand. "I appreciate what you did for Laura. I'd like to replace the fuel you used to take her to the hospital. If you stop by my place, we can fill up your truck from our supply." "No need, Mr. Childs," I replied. "I needed to go to town anyway for groceries and a meal. It wasn't a special trip." They seemed confused when I mentioned my meal, and Roger asked, "Did something happen?" I sighed. "It's not the fuel. I just saw my ex-wife at the restaurant, and it ruined my appetite a bit." I guess I'm still not over the divorce. I felt anger rising, thinking about Beulah and the whole situation. I quickly excused myself, saying, "I'll get the key for the canoe." I grabbed the key from inside the door and handed it to Aaron, who unlocked the canoe. I muttered an apology, still frustrated, then walked back inside while they retrieved the canoe and left. The next few days were slow, filled with thoughts of my failed marriage and job. I was angry, not just about the divorce, but also about my work. They had lied about me quitting and illegally refused to reinstate me. Whether I won my case or not, I wasn't going back to that job. My only goal now was to make them pay for what they did. About a week later, while enjoying a sunset by the river, I heard a boat approaching. It was Roger's John boat again, but this time Laura was alone, steering upstream. She smiled and waved as she pulled into my landing. Carrying a Tupperware container, she approached. "Dad told me you refused to let him replace the fuel," she said, smiling. "So I brought you a carrot cake with cream cheese icing. My favorite." My mouth watered. "That's my favorite too. Let's eat some right now." Laura blushed and hesitated. "I really need to head back before it gets dark." "Come on," I insisted, grabbing her hand. "We'll be quick." She reluctantly agreed, and we went inside. I cut 2 pieces of cake, poured us some port, and started coffee. As we ate, Laura bit her lip and looked at me. "Ron," she began, "I know you're divorced, and if you ever need to talk, I'm here." Hearing her mention the divorce brought up emotions I thought I had buried. I clenched my jaw. "Laura," I said slowly, "I can't talk about that. I loved her, and she slipped away. I just can't." Trying to control my emotions, I walked to the door. Laura followed quietly and touched my back gently. "I'm sorry, Ron. I'll leave, but if you ever need to talk, I'm here." I watched her climb back into the boat and disappear downstream, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next Saturday, I was working in my garden by the river, almost ready to quit because of the heat, when I saw Laura and her friend Tammy approaching in a canoe. They paddled straight to my landing and beached the canoe. Laura bounced up the bank, smiling, while Tammy followed more cautiously. "Ron, I'm really sorry about the other night," Laura said. "I shouldn't have brought up your divorce. I didn't mean to upset you." She hesitated, then continued. "Tammy and I are hungry, and you've got a nice place here. If we share our lunch, could we use your table?" I was taken aback by the bold request, especially since she knew about my no trespassing signs. I stared at her, and she seemed to wilt under my gaze. Turning to leave, she muttered, "I guess not. Sorry we bothered you." As they headed back to the canoe, I overheard Tammy say, "Told you. He's an a-hole." That snapped me out of it. I called after them, "Wait, I'm sorry. I've had a hard time dealing with people since my divorce. Please come back. You can use the table, and you don't even have to share your lunch." Tammy snapped, "Forget it," but Laura convinced her to return. They came back with a large cooler and set up the picnic at my table, laying out cold fried chicken, potato salad, coleslaw, and iced tea. Enough for 3. "Want me to warm the chicken? I've got some fresh tomatoes too," I offered. Laura beamed. "That would be great." I quickly warmed the chicken, washed my hands, and sliced the tomatoes, adding some freshly baked bread. When I returned, Laura was already at my breakfast bar, smiling. "Do you need help with that?" she asked as I approached with the food. I waved her off with a smile, joking about the amount of food they had brought. We all sat down to eat, and despite the awkward start, the meal turned out to be pleasant. At one point, I stood to grab salt and pepper, but Laura insisted on fetching it herself. While she was inside, Tammy leaned in, her voice low and serious. "Ron, I don't know what to make of you, but if you hurt Laura, I'll make you pay. She's been through enough." I snapped back. "You don't get to sit at my table and accuse me of something like that. I have no intention of hurting anyone." Tammy flushed, but before she could respond, Laura returned and sensed the tension. "Tammy, what did you do?" she asked. Tammy muttered that it was nothing, but Laura apologized on her behalf, assuring me that Tammy meant well. Laura gently placed her hand over mine, thanking me for the meal and my hospitality. As they packed up and left, Laura waved with a big smile. Despite the tension with Tammy, I realized I had enjoyed the lunch. Watching them paddle away, I felt conflicted. I liked Laura more than I wanted to admit, but after everything, I wasn't sure I trusted my own feelings. Later that evening, I was sitting by the river watching the stars when my thoughts drifted to Laura. Something about her intrigued me, and I found myself thinking about her more than I wanted to. Over the next few days, I tried to keep busy, but memories of that lunch and her smile kept popping into my head. On Wednesday evening, something unexpected happened. I was skinny dipping in the river, as I often did, when I heard someone calling my name. Startled, I quickly pulled on my cutoffs and stood up, just in time to see Laura coming around the corner of the house holding a pie. Her face turned bright red when she realized I had been unclothed moments earlier. "I'm sorry," she stammered. I didn't know. I wasn't trying to peek." I felt a flash of anger, but quickly let it go when I saw how embarrassed she was. Smiling, I said, "It's all right. You brought a pie?" Still flustered, she nodded. "It's an apple pie. I drove this time since it's so dark. But I didn't know you locked your gate." She was clearly uncomfortable, but I didn't want her to leave. Without thinking, I gently grabbed her arm, but she froze, eyes wide, so I quickly let go. "Sorry," I said. "I didn't want you to leave yet. If you have time, stay for supper. You're welcome to eat with me." Laura's smile returned. "Well, don't let me stop you. Go ahead and cook." I smiled back, glad she wasn't leaving. I started frying up some chicken and reheating the potato and bean salads I'd made earlier. I decided to make enough for both of us, hoping she'd stay. As the chicken cooked, I poured us both some white wine. Laura took a sip and smiled. "Oh, this is good." I moved closer and we chatted while I finished cooking. She asked about my life and I told her about being in the Army Reserve and my lawsuit against my former employer. She seemed genuinely interested. Then she shared her story: divorced, raised on the river, and working part-time at a farm supply store after leaving a job at a feed mill. As we ate, the conversation flowed easily, and before long, Laura realized I'd made enough for 2. "Damn you, I never said I'd stay for supper," she teased, but with a grin. After dinner, we cleaned up together and enjoyed the apple pie she'd brought, along with glasses of port. We moved to the living room, and after a while, Laura leaned her head on my shoulder. It felt peaceful. Without thinking, I kissed her softly. The moment stretched on, both of us lost in the kiss, until we pulled back, seeing the same longing in each other's eyes. Laura leaned against my chest, sighing contentedly. We sat in comfortable silence until the phone rang, startling both of us. I got up to answer it. "Hello?" I said. "Ron, this is Connie Childs. I'm getting worried. Laura was supposed to bring you a pie, and it's getting late. She hasn't come home, and it's after midnight. Can you help me out here?" I laughed, and without thinking replied, "Yeah, Connie, I can help. We were sleeping, and time got away from us." I heard Laura and Connie gasp at the same time. No, that's not what I meant. I meant we fell asleep after dinner," I quickly clarified. Laura, now laughing, took the phone from me. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was going to leave the pie and come home, but he keeps his gate locked, so I had to walk. Then he hadn't eaten yet and invited me to stay for dinner. We had dessert and some wine, and yes, we fell asleep on the couch. We'd still be sleeping if you hadn't called. I didn't realize it was so late. I'll be home soon. Love you. Bye." After hanging up, Laura smiled at me. "Well, I guess I'd better go home. Mom won't sleep until I'm back." She touched my face gently and said, "Thanks for a great evening, Ron." Then she gave me a soft kiss and hurried out the door. I remembered she had walked from the gate and rushed after her. "Wait, Laura, I'll drive you." That night I barely slept thinking about Laura. The next morning I got up at my usual time but felt exhausted. Around 11, my attorney called to tell me my case had been scheduled for a hearing. I headed to town to meet with him. On my way home that evening, I stopped by Laura's farm to return the cake and pie pans. I saw her walking toward the house, covered in dust and wearing worn jeans, a chambray shirt, and boots. She blushed when she noticed me. "Hello, Ron. What brings you here?" I held up the containers, smiling. "Just returning these." Laura invited me inside, where I greeted her mother, Connie, who was preparing supper. Laura excused herself to change out of her dirty clothes. Connie smiled and said, "You had me worried sick the other night." She handed me a glass of iced tea and told me to keep her company while Laura got ready. Not long after, Laura returned, looking stunning in a sundress. Her wet hair and natural beauty took my breath away. "My God, you're beautiful," I blurted out. Laura smiled warmly and took my hand, pulling me in for a gentle kiss. "Why don't we sit until supper's ready? You are staying, right?" Connie assured me there was enough food, but I protested. "I just came to drop off the containers. I can't stay for dinner." Laura, still holding my arm, insisted, "You stayed for dinner at your place, so you're staying here." She led me to a family room, where we sat on a love seat. She quickly settled on my lap and leaned in for another kiss. Just as we were getting comfortable, we heard voices and footsteps. Roger and Aaron entered the room. "Laura!" Roger exclaimed. She pulled back slightly and said, "Daddy, I'm visiting with Ron. We'll see you at supper." Roger shook his head and led Aaron out of the room, muttering, "At least they haven't fallen asleep again." At dinner, I apologized for intruding, but Roger, Connie, and Laura assured me I was welcome any time. "We always have enough to feed one more," Roger said with a nod from the others. As we were having dessert, I mentioned, "I'll be gone for 3 months. If you see anyone at my place, please let Jeff or Charlie Fielding know. I'll leave you my cell number before I go." I glanced at Laura and saw her face tighten. She asked, voice trembling, "Where are you going, Ron?" "I've got a short tour at the 7th Medcom in Heidelberg, Germany," I replied with a chuckle. "I enjoy the military more than my old job. Since the divorce, I've been taking these tours, and I'm making almost as much as I did before. Plus, I get to travel." Laura placed her hand on my arm and asked softly, "When do you leave?" "I've just started enjoying our time together. I'll miss you. Please write me." "Of course I'd like that," I replied with a smile. Roger then chimed in, "Ron, are you interested in renting your cropland to us? I could offer a crop share or pay cash." I thought for a moment. "If you leave the yard and garden for me, I don't see a problem with you using the rest of the land." Before Roger could respond, Laura interrupted, "Daddy, can't this wait? I won't see Ron for a while." I laughed. "It won't take long," and then blushed, realizing how it sounded. Roger, Aaron, and I went into their office to finalize a crop share arrangement. As we finished, Laura came in with a teasing grin. "Are you done? Can I have my man back now?" I stood up, startled by her words, but Laura just smiled and took my hand, leading me to the riverbank. She placed cushions on the ground, and we sat together, sharing a gentle kiss. "Ron, I really like being with you. There's something about you that makes me feel safe and cared for," she said softly. I kissed her and replied, "I feel the same way, Laura. I never thought I'd let anyone in after what happened with Beulah, but I want to see where this goes." We spent the evening kissing and getting to know each other more deeply. Though I knew she would have let me take things further, I stopped us. "I want to wait until it's special. If we do this now, right before I leave, it would feel like the flings I had in Hawaii. Let's wait until I get back." Laura, with tears in her eyes, smiled and agreed. "I want it now, but I want to wait too." We walked back to the house hand in hand, and I said my goodbyes. I didn't see Laura again before leaving for Germany, but thoughts of her stayed with me. Jeff drove me to the airport, and I told him about the arrangement I made with the Childs for renting my land. He grinned. "So, has Laura got her hooks in you yet? Abby says she's head over heels for you." "Yeah, Jeff, I think she might," I admitted. I never thought I'd consider getting serious again after Beulah, but Laura is different. Germany was beautiful, but the months dragged on. Laura and I emailed frequently, and I realized just how much I missed her. When I returned, I expected Jeff to pick me up, but instead, I saw Laura running toward me. She threw her arms around me, kissing me passionately. "I've missed you so much," she said breathlessly. "I've missed you too," I replied, smiling as I grabbed my bags. Laura had driven my truck to the airport and insisted on driving us home. Instead of heading to her parents' place, she took me to my house, which was decorated with welcome home banners and a cooler of champagne waiting. "I've missed you so much," Laura said softly. "This is for our private welcome home party." I smiled and pulled her close. "Let's watch the sunset by the river. It'll be even better with you." We walked to the riverbank where Laura sat in my lap, resting her head on my chest. We kissed gently, savoring the moment. Later, we returned to the house where she set out snacks, and we spent hours cuddling and talking. Eventually, Laura led me to the bedroom, where we made love with a passion that had been building for months. Afterward, she snuggled into me, and I whispered, "Laura, I love you. I never thought I'd love again, but you've proven me wrong. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled and nodded. "Yes, Ron, I'll marry you." We drifted to sleep, holding each other, content in our love. I woke up about an hour later, went to the bathroom, and noticed that Laura had put the food away. I hadn't even heard her get up. After handling my business, I crawled back into bed, and we slept soundly through the night. The next morning, sunlight streaming in woke me slowly. Laura wasn't in bed, but I smelled coffee brewing. Still groggy, I poured a cup and wandered outside, following my usual routine. When I got to the breezeway, I saw Laura sitting under my favorite tree, also undressed, sipping her coffee and enjoying the morning. She heard me and smiled. "Are you just going to stand there, or are you going to kiss me good morning and sit down?" I walked over, kissed her, and sat with her. We talked about our future together until we heard a canoe approaching, signaling the end of our peaceful morning. Arm in arm, we returned to the house, showered together, and Laura made breakfast. As she loaded the dishwasher, I hugged her from behind and kissed her neck. She smiled and kissed me back. "Honey, put on that dress from yesterday and let's go to town. We've got something to buy, don't we?" I teased. Laura grinned. "If it's what I think it is, then yes, let's go." Within 10 minutes, we were out the door. We spent a couple of hours picking out her ring, then had lunch at Max's. When we got home, we didn't even make it inside before falling into bed again. After another round of passion, we drifted off to sleep. I woke to the sound of hammering and shouting. Slowly, I got up, put on my cutoffs, and stumbled to the door. Roger, Connie, Aaron, and his girlfriend were there. I let them in, and Connie asked, "Where's Laura? I thought she was with you." My stomach clenched. Just then, Laura's voice called from the bedroom, "Ron, who are you talking to?" She stepped out, unclothed, saw the visitors, turned beet red, and ran back into the bedroom, slamming the door. I stood in shock while Roger stared at the door. The women, blushing, followed Connie to comfort Laura. A few minutes later, Laura reappeared, still blushing but confident. She walked up to me, wrapped her arms around my arm, and kissed me. "Daddy, I'm sorry I didn't call last night. I'm staying here now. We're getting married." Roger, concerned, asked, "Are you sure everything's okay?" Laura smiled. "Yes, Daddy. I'll be staying here unless Ron objects." She glanced at me, and I held her tighter. Roger shook my hand, congratulating us, followed by Aaron. We spent the afternoon visiting until Laura offered to cook dinner. The women took over the kitchen, while the men shared a bottle of whiskey. By the time dinner was ready, we were tipsy, but in high spirits. We had a good time over dinner, but by the end of the night, everyone was a bit too drunk. Aaron mentioned their car was missing, which led to a round of giggling as they remembered they had left it by the highway. I took Connie to retrieve the car, making her promise to call when they got home safely. That night, as Laura and I lay in bed, she smiled. I'm glad they didn't stay. Now we have the house to ourselves. The next morning, while enjoying coffee outside, I got a call from my attorney reminding me of my upcoming USERRA trial. The week flew by, consumed by the court battle. The company tried to discredit me, even bringing in problematic employees to testify. But I had evidence that turned the case in my favor. The judge awarded me back pay, a promotion, and punitive damages for the company's violation of the law. Despite the win, the company appealed, so I wasn't able to return to work immediately. 3 weeks later, Laura and I got married by the river at her parents' place. We didn't take a traditional honeymoon, as I had a short tour of duty in Great Britain, so Laura joined me, and we turned it into a 3-month honeymoon, touring the UK and even visiting France. When we got back, we had exciting news. Laura was pregnant with twins. She had become pregnant just after we arrived in Great Britain, and we had waited until we got home to share the news. As the pregnancy progressed, Laura grew more beautiful, joking about how she looked. But to me, she was radiant. In the 3rd month, we found out she was carrying twins. When the big day came, Laura's labor was quick, and soon we welcomed our daughter Constance and son Ronald. They were healthy and perfect, and Laura had never looked happier. Our house quickly became too small, so I started building 2 more bedrooms and an office. When Charlie visited, he and his girlfriend barely let go of the babies. At 4 months, I finally won the appeal against my former company. They folded, and I received a large settlement. With that and my savings, Laura and I were set for life. One day, while shopping at Walmart, I saw Beulah, my ex-wife. Laura, ever the firecracker, approached her and said, "Thank you for making me the happiest woman alive. I don't know why you let Ron go, but I thank you for it every day." Beulah, teary-eyed, looked at me and whispered, "You deserve it, Ronnie. Have a good life." Laura smiled, took my hand, and we walked away, happy and content. After our unexpected encounter with Beulah, Laura and I didn't dwell on it. She had said her piece, and it seemed to close a chapter for both of us. Life carried on peacefully, and Laura and I grew even closer. I stayed in the reserves, but limited my tours, choosing to spend more time at home. I had recently been promoted to lieutenant colonel, and staying close to home with Laura and our growing family made me happier than ever. I bought the land next to ours, the one Roger had wanted, and let him and Aaron farm it. I helped them out when they needed an extra hand. Life in the small town settled into a comforting rhythm. I enjoyed coffee with my in-laws in Steelville most mornings, but I still preferred having coffee with Laura by the river when the weather was nice. Time flew by, and before we knew it, years had passed. One evening, Jeff, Charlie, our wives, and I were sitting by the river at Jeff's place, drinks in hand, listening to our kids play in the old swimming hole. We couldn't help but exchange admiring glances at our wives. Over the years, we had all grown close, and there was a silent understanding between us. Laura still had my heart, and my love for her only grew stronger over the years. As she passed by with another round of drinks, I set my glass down, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled her into my lap. She let out a playful scream, then collapsed against me laughing. I kissed her deeply, and as I looked into her eyes, I knew the night ahead would be special. Turning to our friends, I said, "This woman is my life. She saved me. You all know how lost I was after my first marriage, but these last 11 years with Laura have been the best of my life." Laura blushed, but smiled proudly, kissing me again. Just as we started to pull away, one of the kids shouted, "Dad, can't you wait until you get home?" We laughed as the kids, dripping wet, looked at us in mock disgust. Laura smiled warmly and said, "You've seen us kiss before. I love him dearly, and I'll never deny him his kisses. Now go clean up. Supper's almost ready." Amanda, Charlie's wife, chimed in, "Laura, that's exactly how I feel about Charlie. We all have the perfect men, and there's nothing we wouldn't do for them." Laura nodded, and an unspoken bond deepened between us all. The rest of the evening was filled with laughter, food, and stories, just another in a series of unforgettable moments with our friends and family. As the years passed, Jeff, Charlie, and I all retired from the reserves. Jeff became a major general, Charlie a colonel, and I retired as a brigadier general. I was grateful every day that Laura had pursued me, pushing me to see how perfect we were together. Eventually, our twins, Connie and Ronnie, graduated high school, Connie as valedictorian and Ronnie as salutatorian, and left for college. They chose to attend my alma mater nearby, and we rented them an apartment so they could experience college life. Laura and I were proud of the advice and guidance we had given them, but we knew they would have to navigate their own paths. One evening, as Laura and I reflected on how far we'd come, I said, "Kids learn by example as much as they do in the classroom. I think we've done well by them." She smiled and leaned into me. "I think so too." As the sun set and the river shimmered in golden hues, I felt a deep sense of peace. Laura, as always, was beside me. We had built a life together that exceeded all my expectations. With the kids gone for the evening, I turned to see Laura waiting for me by the river, looking beautiful in my favorite outfit. The sight of her took my breath away, and I knew I wasn't about to miss out on this perfect moment.